Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to join us today for another webinar with the Alumni Association. I'm hoping that you are remaining safe and being well during this very chaotic time in our lives. Thank you for joining once again. And we're here to talk about the topic of understanding and managing the personal toll of COVID-19 with Dr. Kaz Nelson. My name is Steve Davis. I am the director of of Affinity Engagement with the University of Minnesota Alumni Association, and I will be your co-host for today. I first would like to give a special thank you and gratitude to our members and donors. Without you, opportunities like the webinar would not be possible. We really thank you for your support and ask if anybody is looking for more information about the Alumni Association to visit us at umnalumni.org. As you know, the Alumni Association has been offering a lot of digital offerings, including our webinar series, as we try to do our part to flatten the curve. We thank you for being a part of these and ask that you continue to support. Look for some of the upcoming webinars that we have, like these in the next few weeks and also in the beginning of May. You can find all of these opportunities at umnalumni.org/virtual. A couple of housekeeping things to keep note of, hoping that everyone is having good audio and can see from their computers. If you are calling via your phone, hopefully you have done that correctly. If not, please follow the instructions that were in the email invite that kind of tells you how to do a one-click option for your phone, or you can use the instructions to the left as you see to call in via that option. The other thing is there is a Q&A function that will be available throughout the entirety of this webinar. Feel free to throw in questions in that. We will be monitoring that, and we'll try to address some of those questions in the middle of the presentation and at the end of the presentation. So don't be afraid to ask some questions. And lastly, I would like to introduce our special host as our webinar presenter, Dr. Kaz Nelson. Dr. Kaz Nelson is a distinguished fellow American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology and serves as the Vice Chair for Education in the Minnesota Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and the Program Director of the Psychiatry Residency at the University of Minnesota Medical School. Dr. Nelson is an honors graduate of the University of Minnesota Morris and received her medical degree in psychiatry residency training from the University of Minnesota Medical School. Dr. Nelson is a 2018 Minnesota Psychiatric Society Psychiatrist of the Year and a 2018 Exemplary Psychiatrist awarded for the state of Minnesota by the National Alliance of Mental Illness. Dr. Nelson developed an openly accessible podcast with her brother George called the Mind Deconstructed, which aims to serve in the general community to demystify and increase the understanding of common mental health conditions. Thank you, Dr. Kaz, for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. It's my absolute pleasure to be here today. As Steve mentioned, I've been part of the University of Minnesota since age 18. So from my time in college to medical school, residency, and then I joined faculty in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Minnesota right after that. And so I'm really an alumni 3 times over, and it's my absolute pleasure to be able to engage with you all today and give back in terms of what we're learning about the impact of COVID-19 and how to get through this together. And I'm here in front of you, not someone who's immune to these impacts. You know, balancing work life, family life in the midst of this global toll this virus is taking on us is absolutely not easy. So I don't want you to have any misimpression that I've somehow cracked the code or figured this out and I'm living perfectly mentally healthy myself. That's not necessarily the truth. The truth is these concepts are universal. Nobody is immune from this impact, but we're learning how to how to endure, and I really want to share that with you. I also want to give a shout out to the Alumni Association. I got my neckerchief in the mail the other day. I don't know how the Alumni Association guessed a couple months ago that you'd be needing a face mask in order to go out in public, but I've been sporting my Goldie Gopher neckerchief proudly, and it came in handy a couple times when we had to do a supply run. So I'm really grateful to the Alumni Association for their crystal ball, looking forward and sending me my free neckerchief with Goldie Gopher on it. So without further ado, let's jump into the presentation. But one more ground rule: this is meant to be interactive. I'm not good at just talking at a screen for an hour. So along the way, please click the question and answer button, ask questions. Steve's going to be taking a look and picking out questions throughout the presentation. I saved a ton of time at the end for dialogue. So I would just love for this to be as interactive as possible. We've even got a couple polls put in there to help keep us communicating with one another bi-directionally. All right, pulling up my slides here. I don't have many slides, but just wanted to let you know I am engaged in social media, in Twitter and Facebook. I love interacting with the University of Minnesota community. So feel free to follow. I'll follow you back on Twitter or Facebook, and we can continue the conversation after this. I've also put the website there to my podcast that Steve mentioned, the Mind Deconstructed. All right, starting out, I would just like us to take a moment of actually reflection, because we don't have many opportunities to stop and do that, to stop and think. I know we're going. People who are parents are trying to do crisis parenting, crisis schooling. There are people that are not working right now, or essential employees and are working, and all of this juggling has just been incredibly stressful. So I'm just going to invite everyone to just to quietly reflect for a moment. I'll give you 30 or 40 seconds of quiet to do that. And I would like you to complete this sentence. And then our poll will have to do with what you think about. So remember what you think about. I'd like you to just reflect on this question. I remember an instance where I observed the COVID-19 pandemic impacting someone's mental health. Okay, let's reflect on that for just a moment. Could everybody think of something? Could be yourself, could be a loved one, could be something you saw on the news or something at the grocery store. We're going to do a little bit of a poll now to get a sense of what it was that you thought about. So Steve's going to put a poll up on the screen, and I would just invite you to answer this question. Question number 1, when considering the mental health impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, what have you observed? Panic or terror, isolation and loneliness, grief and bereavement, a sensation of feeling stressed or overwhelmed, or something else? I'm seeing the results come in. This is great. All right, looks like almost everyone was able to figure that out. Okay. Steve, can people see the responses here, or is that just me?
Everybody should be able to see the responses now.
Okay, perfect. So you can see that the majority of our audience, 462 of you in that prompt that I raised about the mental health impact, 78 thought that this general sensation of feeling stressed or overwhelmed was captured in what they were remembering. And then that's followed by isolation and loneliness. Yes. Very, very understandable. And then, but that is followed by grief and bereavement, and even some people endorsing having seen this kind of panic or terror. You know, even a third of you have seen that, and that's certainly a very serious. All of these are serious, but that panic terror is really can be incapacitating. Absolutely. So that's good to see. All right, we've got one more question for you. Have you experienced feeling concerned for your personal safety or the safety of a close loved one? We'll give you about a minute or so to contemplate that and register your response. Okay, it looks like almost everyone has voted here, and we're up to about 82% yes, that there has been concern for one's actual personal safety of themselves or a loved one. That is a very substantial response, and not again, not unexpected. This virus is potentially fatal, and we're all quite concerned about it. And many of us do have pause in, should I go to the grocery store? Should I leave the house? Should I invite someone into my home? What if the dog has the virus and I don't know it, you know? And with something so high stakes, it's absolutely understandable that somebody would have this concern for one's personal safety. Thank you so much for registering your feedback on these topics, because I'll be revisiting these statistics that you supplied throughout the course of our time together. I'm just going to close out the poll here then. Okay, so what is going on here? Many of you may be familiar with something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I think this concept, which was developed in psychology and social sciences, really, really relevant to us today. And this is a model that's been adapted by some of my colleagues, which looks at Maslow's hierarchy in this context of COVID-19. And what this says is everyone, in terms of their well-being and their general mental health, sort of starts at the bottom of this pyramid. And they have basic needs for sleep, toilet paper, breathing, and bodily health, nutrition, exercise. There's just these body-based needs that we as human beings, organisms have. And in order to be well, if we don't have those needs met, you kind of stop there in terms of your ability to function. But higher up on the pyramid is safety, whether that's through masks or safety inside of your house or with your relationships and loved ones, safety in terms of that. And then moving up on the pyramid, if you have bodily safety and environmental safety, you can get to connection, your brain health, mind health, curiosity, and then really at the top of the pyramid is the capacity to shine or to create something new or to really change the system. And so my concern whenever we have these conversations about wellness, about mental health and the toll of these kinds of things is a lot of this stuff going around on Facebook or on TV or other places is sort of talking about, here's some things you can do to keep your mind engaged, like a puzzle or something like that on Facebook. But and if you are truly somebody for whom all of these basic needs are met, absolutely, then that might be a wonderful solution. But you know, that really rings hollow, the idea of talking about a puzzle, when you don't have your basic needs met. You're not eating, you're not sleeping, or you fear gravely for the safety of a loved one. This COVID-19 context, this pandemic, has brought us down on our hierarchy of needs because of this safety issue. 82% of you said, yes, I worry about the safety of myself or the safety of a loved one. This means we're down here. We're down at the bottom. And so if any of you felt like some of those suggestions that are out there rung a little hollow, that might be why. That you might be in this bottom of the pyramid type place. Now, if you're on Pinterest and creating things and looking up new patterns and crafting things at home, that's wonderful too. I don't want to take anything away from that. If this is the time to make a new bench, you know, for your entryway, that's amazing. And that's a clue that you might be higher up on this pyramid. That's still important for you to understand that, because those who you communicate with, those around you, loved ones in other places, you can't assume that they're up there as well. So there can be this kind of toxic positivity of, well, why aren't you building a bench either? You know, don't you have all this time? Well, that's just not going to be possible for somebody who is not getting their basic needs met towards the bottom of this pyramid. So I just want to, I'll keep visiting this framework as kind of an organizing principle for our time together today. All right, next I'm going to show you a little 1-minute video clip. I have to do a little disclaimer on this video clip. This is something in all honesty came across my Facebook feed as a little funny video. And so you probably might have seen it, you know, if you're engaged. It kind of made the rounds, a popular video because it's funny. It's a little prank video of a carpenter playing a prank on another carpenter. And but I'm not playing this for comedic effect. I'm not just trying to give you a chuckle, although you might chuckle. When I saw this video, I thought, first I laughed, and then I said, this is a very important video that I'm going to show in all of my talks on mental health moving forward, because there's a critical neuroscience, brain science principle illustrated by this video that I have not seen demonstrated better in any other example that I've seen. And so I'm going to take a minute now and I'm going to show you this video, and then we'll debrief it afterwards and try to notice what was observed, okay? And then one more disclaimer. This is a carpenter playing a prank on another carpenter. And so it's in a workshop, and the first carpenter is going to make it look like he injured his finger. It's not an injury. There's no blood. It's a little nail polish or a little ketchup. I don't want anyone to get squeamish or to need to leave the room if you don't like seeing blood. Everyone's safe. There's no actual injury. It's just feigned. And we're going to see how this plays out, okay?
Hey, Tyler. Tyler, come here for a second. Can you help me? Yeah. Ooh. Give me those snaps. Here, I need you to snip it. Like. No. Actually, right.
Oops, my apologies.
Ooh. I need you to snip it, like. No, no. Actually, right there. No, right there.
All right, did you catch it? What did you see there? The prankster made it look like his finger was stapled. And when Tyler came over to help, he actually said, snip it right here. And he used the finger that was supposedly stapled to the board to point that out. And poor Tyler, his colleague, didn't notice this at all. And I think the reason why the video is a little bit funny is people are left with the impression that maybe Tyler isn't so bright, or you know, what's wrong with this guy that he didn't notice this. And I think that that's a natural conclusion to come to, which is why the video is kind of funny, but that's not actually what's going on. We don't have any information in this video to comment on how bright or not Tyler is. What we do see is something that's universal to all human beings, and that's when we're under threat, when our brain resources are channeled onto dealing with some kind of crisis or threat, it is virtually impossible for the brain to take in new information or to analyze things or calculate or imagine different possibilities or integrate what should be plain in front of you. And so Tyler was so frightened, so scared, that his brain was not able to process that the finger was not actually stapled. And actually, even after the prankster carpenter walked away, it was probably 30 or 40 seconds before Tyler even snapped into other part of his brain to say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? And this is very, very, very common. And what I'm noticing is in this context of COVID-19, with all of us going down together to the bottom of this hierarchy, where we're all feeling this universal threat, 82% are actually concerned about our safety. That impacts the brain and how it works. And many of us have a full toolkit of things that we do to help us manage our mental health on a day-to-day basis. But this is really something that many people have not necessarily had to face. Some have, certainly some people in our society have daily threats to their safety in different ways. But some people have privilege where that's not necessarily the case. And so it may be this new context, and not everybody necessarily has a full toolkit taking into account this context. So that is what I need us to all understand together, that our brains are operating differently, potentially than we're used to them operating, which is why, 78% of you feeling this sense of being overwhelmed or physically stressed, that, or not maybe necessarily you feeling that, but seeing that in other people, that's really the consequence of what I'm talking about. It fits. So this is a good time to check in with Steve. Are you noticing any questions that I can respond to?
Yes, I actually am. There's a really good question in here in regards to secondary trauma, because we talk about our mindset of we may be in a good capacity for ourselves, but we hear stories, we talk to our friends, we talk to children, hear about people losing their job. Can you talk a little bit more about how that secondary trauma can kind of affect our mental capacity as well?
Secondary trauma is something we've been thinking about for a while, even outside of this context, particularly me in our field in psychiatry, some of the stories that we hear in the context of delivering care to people who have been through traumatic experiences, that can actually be a trauma, even though we're not the one enduring that. Just even hearing those stories, having those mental images, knowing that other people are being harmed in this way, that's completely egregious and painful and upsetting, and in some cases extremely unjust, can represent a threat. It can disturb our well-being. It can cause sleep problems, anxiety, psychological stress, medical health issues. So this is an absolute real thing. And I guess that would be my main response, is to understand that this is an actual real thing and not just minimize it, not just say, well, that didn't happen to me, that happened to someone else. What's the problem? No, that's not the right way to think about it. Even if a threat or a trauma happens to another person, we can still be impacted by it. Look at what's happening in New York to the community there. It's being decimated by this. And certainly seeing what the medical community, the way they've needed to mobilize, the kinds of risks they've undertaken, the kinds of consequences to that community, I find that very prompting of stress, concern, grief. I have a sense of near panic. What if this happens to our community? There's a true threat there, hearing these kinds of stories and circumstances. And it's nothing to downplay. It is okay to be impacted by that. And we should understand it, honor it. And then later in this webinar, I'll tell you what steps to take, what you can do about it if you are experiencing an impact from primary or secondary stress and trauma.
That's a good point, leading up to the next portion of the question, where, you know, you spoke about our brain not being able to function in the normal capacity because of the things that are going on right now. You know, I don't know if there is a term or a name for that at this point, but what can people do to kind of help themselves if they're trying to, especially like support their children at home and just trying to hold it together? Is there anything that we can do for ourselves?
Absolutely. I'm going to give you step by step the steps you can take to be able to address that. Simply stated, what we're going to try to do is move from the threat center of our mind, the one that is being prompted from this threat to our safety. Now, if we have a true threat to our safety, then we actually need to respond to that, because it's not a pretend threat, it's a real threat. But if you are in a position where you're kind of more worrying about the threat, but you're actually safe in your environment, there is a way to shut that off and to get your whole brain back. And I'm going to teach you exactly how to do it.
Great. And one last question before I guess you can continue. It's another in regards to anxiety, and, you know, how can we cope with the fact of maybe thinking when the end of this is going to happen? Is there light at the end of the tunnel? Just like that whole feeling, how do we cope with that?
Yes, it's perfectly natural for many people to note that something's happening to our society, something's happening to our globe. We're needing to respond to a global threat. Will things be the same after this? Will they be different? When will we get back to normal? Will there be a new normal or the same normal? All of this uncertainty is warranted because of the circumstances we're in. Now, the question is related to the anxiety and the worry about these circumstances. How do you move from ruminating about these questions that we really don't have a clear answer to at this point? If we're constantly wondering about that, how do you shift from that state of anxiety and threat-based thinking to a place of calm? And I'm hoping the techniques that I share with you will actually address that as well. But it's an excellent question, and you're pointing out a true true phenomena. Any kind of change is stressful. Even good changes are stressful. And we want to be able to rise to the occasion in how we manage that. Awesome questions. There'll be opportunity for more questions. I'm saving lots of time. Here's what you've been waiting for. What to do? Okay, we can spend all day talking about this is happening. It's real. It's nothing to minimize. We can acknowledge it. It's totally legitimate. Now what? Well, here's what here's some expert consensus on what we can do about this. Evidence-based ways of moving up on the pyramid. What you'll see here is that the kinds of things that you need to do to meet your needs are going to depend on what level of the pyramid you are at. So step one is doing really accurate self-assessment. Am I up here at the top of the pyramid where all my basic needs are met all the way up? Or am I really in this place that nobody wants to be or enjoys being at, where even basic bodily needs are not being met, or even safety needs? And so if you do your self-assessment and find that you are truly on the bottom of that pyramid, getting a meal in, even a small meal, a snack, can help to meet that need. Even if it's not the world's most nutritious lunch of boiled carrots or something like that, getting some sustenance in to meet your nutrition needs is going to be a step in the right direction. Drink, ideally water. It sounds silly to put this on here, but with COVID and all the breathing issues and just knowing that breathing is necessary for basic bodily functions, breathing is here at the bottom. Moving, sleeping, excreting, whether that's, breast milk, urine, number 2, that's not a medical term, taking care of those basic bodily needs. And then, in some cases, medicating, if medicine is necessary for your bodily function and health. And then saying all that those needs are met, you've done all of those things, maybe you're just up at this next level of having safety needs, setting boundaries where things are stressful or unsafe. If you find that you go on Twitter and feel triggered by that, feel prompted, a sense of anxiety, or you're watching news and you feel anxiety, you might need to set a boundary on how much of that you're taking in. Self-soothing, staying safe, not going out to those outside of the home unless you have to. If you do have to go outside of the home, preparing yourself with proper equipment in order to stay safe. That's where you're gonna need to put your effort in. And then moving all the way up, there's some other wonderful suggestions here. Spirituality, love, nature, belonging, finding something humorous, something you're passionate about. And all the way up to creativity, autonomy, contribution, purpose, altruism, serving others in the context of this crisis we find ourselves in. And all of these are wonderful things, we could say, helpful things, but be very, very careful. The biggest thing I can warn you about is if you are here at level 4 or 5, where you have bodily needs or safety needs, and you are trying to figure out how to do these higher level skills, like starting a new, I have nothing against building furniture, but if you're trying to meet your body or safety needs by building furniture, that's a mismatch to what's needed at that point in time. If you are truly all the way up there, that's a wonderful form of self-expression and creativity and functionality. So it's just a matter of matching the skills and the steps with the correct level. Is this clear? I'm hoping that this is a useful model. Oh, here's another thing. Say you're up at level 2, you're really feeling like your basic needs are met, you're working your way up on the pyramid. If you have a loved one or someone in your family or someone that you want to help, it is good to assess. Maybe one of the things they're struggling with is being at the bottom of the pyramid or having a lot of safety concerns or something like that. Make sure that if you want to help or give suggestions or anything like that, that you focused on these types of skills that are a match to those needs. Because you want to, it can be quite invalidating to focus on something, oh, you're struggling, why don't you volunteer? Well, that's maybe a match to what they need. They might have a safety need in that moment. So you can accidentally invalidate somebody if you don't quite assess their needs properly, or you make assumptions about their needs. All right. So next, I want to teach you a very specific skill that I alluded to when you asked your questions about how to hack your own brain in order to switch off that threat mode, that threat response mode, so that you can get your whole brain back and be even more equipped to face a threat. It's like if Tyler in that Carpenter video, if he could flip a switch within him to all of a sudden notice things around him and move out of that threat response mode, I can teach you exactly how to do that. And some people say this is too good to be true, but it's pure biology, and it's using principles that all mammals have. So unless you are not a mammal, this will work. All sets of mammals have two types of nerve wiring in their body. They have the nerve wiring that responds to a threat response system, and a set of nerves that are responsible for calming and resting activities like sleep and digestion and reading and focus and contemplating things, okay? And each set of wiring can only be stimulated you can only stimulate one or the other. It's like the gas and the brakes. You really can't press both at the same time in the system. And so if you feel like your body is going into threat mode, that might be this feeling of anxiety, this feeling of panic or terror. This will even work for any of those kinds of sensations where you feel this doom or this fear or threat response. That means that the threat nerves are firing. Pew, pew, pew. And what you're going to try to do is actually stimulate the rest and digest nerves. The parasympathetic nervous system, it's called. The name of the nerve is the vagal nerve. It connects your brain to your heart, your lungs, and your stomach. And when you stimulate it, it calms all those things down. There's slow ways to stimulate it, and there's also fast, instantaneous ways. And so here's how you do that. You're going to stimulate your vagal nerve. The fastest way is to put ice or ice water on the face. Why does that work? Well, mammals over time evolved the capacities when they dive deep into ice cold water. They want the breathing and energy and resource use to slow down so that they can dive deep and come back up. And so that's why it's always tragic, but that's why in winter, like when kids are skating on the ice and if they fall through, they can sometimes be resuscitated even hours later because of this reflex that mammals have. It's something about ice water on the face stimulates this preservation response and stimulates the vagal nerve very strongly. Now, cold water, splashing cold water on the face is not enough. It has to be icy cold water, whether that's a bowl of water with ice in it or a frozen water bottle that you hold up to your face like this, that works too. But it's got to be icy. And doing that will actually bring you from a 10 out of 10 sense of stress and anxiety down to a 7 or 8 out of 10, almost instantaneously. It's very powerful. I don't know how many of you watch Iron Man, but in one of the Iron Men, there's a scene where Tony Stark stops the car and gets out and rubs snow on his face. And I thought, oh, he must have learned this reflex because that's a very powerful treatment for intense anxiety. And so this ice or ice water on the face is one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is this breathing technique. Now, I know people have tried lots of different breathing techniques, have gotten lots of guidance on breathing. I'm not sharing this with you as a kind of a, oh, here's a breathing practice you can try. There's actually something very magical about this ratio that directly stimulates the vagal nerve. Because every time you breathe in, there's a little bit of stimulation to your fight or flight nerves. And every time you breathe out, there's a little bit of stimulation to your rest and digest nerves. So if you're breathing out twice as long as you breathe in, that will stimulate this nerve. And it's a way of directly hacking that system. And so I will demonstrate the breathing technique. And those of you at home, feel free, if you're willing, to breathe along with me. It's a perfect opportunity to try it. And then if you combine this paced breathing with the ice water on the face, that will directly stop that threat system, because you'll have stimulated the rest and digest system and bring back your full brain, where you can use it to be effective and to take in information and to analyze things and to get organized. Okay, so we're going to try it now. I'm going to have you breathe in, 2, 3, 4, then breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Just like that. And you do several cycles of that, ideally with an ice pack or a frozen water bottle on your face like this. And you will feel your brain shift from that flooded, overwhelmed, I can't make sense of anything, feel like I'm dying feeling, to okay, I got this. And there are many people who have a full range of mental health management tools when they can kind of get their wits about them. That's the expression that somebody might use. And this is the technique to bring your brain back, to be able to use that toolkit that many of you already have. What people are noticing, though, is that in this era where they're pulled to the bottom of the pyramid, their usual toolkit is falling short, and it's very frustrating. So that's why I have prioritized this technique in sharing it with you today, because it might be able to bring you to a place where you can use that toolkit that you normally use and find helpful, your self-management toolkit that you've been working on building your whole life. The problem is you might find that you haven't had access to that toolkit when you've really felt your family's and self-safety on the line. All right, I love this little graphic. If you can do it, you've got this. This is your encouragement. And I want to plug my podcast too. My most recent episode is about the mental health toll of COVID-19, and I go into detail regarding some other strategies and technique for addressing the isolation and things like that. And so that's on my website, theminddeconstructed.org, or anywhere you access podcasts on your phone. Some of you have a podcast app, and you should be able to look for the Mind Deconstructed and find it there. I also have other episodes with general mental health education meant for a general audience. So if you want to learn more about mental health and other psychiatric conditions, you can find good information there. But let's shift to some questions now. We have plenty of time to be able to dialogue about these issues.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kaz. This has been a very great presentation, and thank you for the breathing exercise. There are a number of questions coming in, and I'll try to address as many as I can. The first one, there's a few of them that are very themed like, and it's really about our new working normal.
Yes.
Knowing that, some people now are at home, they've had to set up, even myself personally, had to set up my own new home office to be more comfortable working. But, there are others like teachers who have been, working with children and are now feeling a little more isolated because they have to adjust to, doing more virtual teaching. And then you have healthcare workers who are in the heart of this, going into work and feeling the anxiety of, you know, trying to save people's lives, but also keeping themselves safe. With this new working norm, like, how do we adjust our mindset or kind of prepare ourselves and help ourselves in those situations?
Yes. You described a range of different types of circumstances and examples. And each one of those examples has unique circumstances associated with them that represent its own form of stress. I want to directly address this idea of being an essential worker, whether that's somebody that's working at a grocery store or gas station or other places where we get essential supplies, or even being on providing direct patient care or interactions within the healthcare system. Some of these essential activities that have continued to take place in person. Part of the reason why people find this such a conundrum or upsetting is because they're concerned about their health and safety. And that is bringing them to the bottom, essentially, of this hierarchy of needs. And despite being down there, they do feel a responsibility to serve the community, a responsibility to do their job. And all of those things are in tension. I'm worried about my safety, yet this is important. And there's a kind of a push-pull there. And so what one can do is look at that pyramid and really say, you know, my safety is at risk. I'm going to take every step I can take to stay safe through sanitizing, wearing a mask, encouraging one's employer to ensure that there are as safe as possible work practices, advocating for those kinds of base safety aspects. And that's steps people can take to stay safe. And that will help them to move up on the pyramid and help to bring down this threat response, which is adding to this sensation of demand and threat and stress. And some of the other examples, this adjustment, I'm part of the working at home crew in the new home office like you, Steve. And what everyone has to understand is this is a major change in context, and change, any kind of change, even good changes. People who've had babies know that's a good change. You have a baby, but wow, stressful to have and adapt to a new change. And oftentimes when we have a context change like that, we have to learn new skills, new habits, new approaches in the new context. And that is exhausting and takes a lot of resources. And so if you're somebody in that circumstance, whatever you can do to come up with a good enough model, I'm going to do good enough parenting, good enough distance teaching, good enough crisis schooling within my home, good enough work online, rather than holding yourself accountable for perhaps very high standards that you might have set in these different domains. We have to understand we're in a pandemic. Everyone has some form of change in context or direct threat, and we are going to need to understand this is real and modify our expectations to give ourselves a little bit of a break, a little bit of self-compassion to say, no, I'm not homeschooling, I'm crisis schooling, at home, for example. And it's not going to be as good as the systems that we've set up when we have not had to deal with a global health crisis.
Yes, that's true. Another question that's very much themed in the practice of the pyramid and the different levels that we go through. Is it normal to kind of feel like you're in a few of these at the same time, or going through different ones throughout the entire day? Like, how do you, I guess, understand that you're in these different spaces?
Yes, this can be fluid. So if you're somebody who has been isolating at home and your pantry stocked and you have enough toilet paper and all your loved ones are sort of quarantined in and everyone's healthy, you might be a little bit up higher on the pyramid. Now something happens, you have to go to the store and all of a sudden there's a safety threat, or someone in your household becomes ill. That happened in our household. We have someone ill here now, and I'm just, is this COVID? Are we now all at risk because we're isolating together with somebody who's ill? And let me tell you, that just brings you right down. I might have been operating at a level 3, before this, and now not so much. We're a little bit down lower in the pyramid. So this can change with circumstances. And I think, again, that's where this little bit of understanding and self-compassion comes in, because, it's not worthwhile to spend a lot of time feeling guilty or shameful because the circumstances changed and where you were on the pyramid changed. The whole point is to, I'm assessing that I'm down at the bottom here now for legitimate reasons. I'm going to change my strategies. We're going to just be eat, drink, breathe, move, sleep, excrete, and medicate now, because that's where I'm at, and that's okay.
That's a good point, because it leads into another portion of that question about when you feel that you're probably, at the bottom of that pyramid, are there any practical motivational things that we can do to kind of get ourselves up? I know we can do the breathing exercise and kind of practice some meditation, but are there any other things that you think will be helpful?
Well, the nature of this pyramid is one that if those basic needs are being met, then you can hop up to the next level, and you can be empowered to hop up to the next level, where you're then expanding your scope of things that you're addressing a little bit more broadly. So let's say you're just really at level 5 and your basic needs aren't being met. You're going to maybe put that distance learning packet for your kids on the shelf for a little bit. I mean, truly, when those needs are met, you have food, you have your safety secured. Then maybe that's the time to take down the packet and go through it and come up with a daily schedule or a learning plan with your kids. But really give yourself that understanding that that's going to essentially be virtually impossible without having those basic needs met. But human beings do strive naturally to go to that top of the pyramid. Now, what gets in the way, though? I'm so glad you brought this up. This is a really important point. For those 649 of you still on the call, you'll be glad you're on the call. There are things that get in the way of people working their way up that pyramid kind of naturally. And drugs and alcohol can really do that. So I'm not trying to, I've had a quarantine myself too, we're not driving. If you have some alcohol or something in the pantry, it can be kind of tempting to sort of late day, get out that glass of wine, maybe another one. And it's those kinds of things can feel like self-care or self-soothing, or that you're addressing needs. But we've seen over time that these types of strategies tend to impact people's capacity to learn and grow and think and progress on these developmental trajectories that we're all striving to do. And so there's sort of an illusion that that's a helpful or like a self-medicating kind of strategy, but it ends up causing more harm than good, particularly with chronic use. I'm not saying now and then don't have a glass of wine or something like that, but please note that if you're feeling like this is like a daily ritual as part of your new normal on home isolation, that it's not benign. There are potential consequences to working your way up the pyramid with those kinds of strategies. So be real careful.
I'll keep that in mind. Yeah, I'll drink some more water. I think that's a good point.
Yes, but it says drink on this slide here. It's not meaning it's alcoholic beverages or high caffeine beverages.
Good point. So we talked a lot about things that we can do for ourselves, there are a number of questions coming in about how to help others who may be going through issues or may feel like they may have some symptoms close to COVID. How can we be psychiatrists ourselves and helping those that are around us?
I will tell you the most important tool in a psychiatrist's arsenal or a toolkit, we'll say. I'm trying to move away from war analogies, but the most important tool is a skill that has taken me years of practice to try to perfect, because it's not always easy. But that skill is, well, I'll show you the slide that I skipped over before, but it's pretty germane here. If you have someone who's upset or worried, and then you offer a solution, they might actually say, I don't want a solution, I want to be mad. And you see that very often, and that can be very frustrating if you're trying to be helpful to someone who's distressed and you offer a solution and they don't want it or something like that. And so what you do instead, rather than offering a solution, although I did give you some solutions on that other slide, what you do first is you acknowledge what's legitimate. And you keep acknowledging what's legitimate until they get their whole brain back. And then you can offer a solution or offer some way of helping based on that pyramid. So if someone's worried that they have COVID, you might say, wow, you must be really scared. You must be really concerned. This has been on the news. People have died from this. No wonder you're scared. Of course you're scared. And they say, yes. And you say, okay, well, what do you need to do to investigate that? How can I help you? Oh, you had a negative test, but you're still not doing well. Well, I wonder what that's about, right? But any of that kind of problem solving needs to come after full recognition and repeating and proving to that person very actively that you see what is legitimate about their concern. Otherwise, they're going to light your solution on fire.
Great, thank you. And I think before we come to an end, for the sake of time, I think this is a great question and to kind of close some things out. Now that we kind of have an understanding of where we may be or not on that pyramid, and how we can possibly help ourselves and possibly help others, when do we, I think, you know, what is a good time for us or a good point for people to realize that maybe they should start seeking some professional help in that area? And what are some resources that we can point people to for that?
Absolutely. Of course, I was speaking generally today about general mental health of us as a community facing these universal threats and pressures. But of course, there's going to be a large number of us for whom these concerns or mental health struggles or difficulties, challenges actually cross over a threshold into mental illness that needs to be addressed, treated, and collaboratively with somebody providing care for the medical aspect of mental health or psychiatric health. And the amazing thing about this at this point of time in society is a lot of the mental health services, psychiatric care, counseling has been able to continue with video conferencing. Not that everyone has access to video conferencing, but many people have a phone or a laptop, like to be able to view this webinar. And a lot of these services have continued uninterrupted because of this technology. So whereas you might feel like, well, maybe a visit where someone has to listen to your heart and lungs might be more difficult with physical distancing, a lot of the mental health services have continued pretty seamlessly. So I would say don't assume that there aren't appointments or aren't options to be able to connect with care. There absolutely are therapists and psychiatrists on their computer screens providing care throughout this time. And if you are somebody who previously received those services, I would check in with people who've provided care for you just to find out, do you need to download some kind of app or something to be able to continue that? What would that look like? And if you're someone who wants to establish new services, you could reach out to your primary care office and ask for a referral, or there are lots of freestanding mental health clinics who could receive your call. if you're somebody who has health insurance, not everyone does, but you could ask your health insurance provider who is in network or who do they recommend in terms of coverage. I know that sometimes there can be barriers to setting up care even under the best of circumstances, so I don't want to sugarcoat things. But there is access continuing during this difficult time, which is a bright spot in all of this.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kaz. This has been very, very enlightening and helpful. Hopefully that everyone that was participating felt the same. Sorry we weren't able to address all the questions, but feel free. We will provide a copy of this webinar on a video as well as the slides so that you have that as a resource. We'll have Dr. Kaz's information as well if you want to continue to ask questions and keep that conversation going. But really, I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule, Dr. Kaz, for talking to people about this issue, which is very prevalent right now. But hopefully we'll get past this. You know, this is just a shortcoming at the time that we're all having to deal with and adjust. And I really appreciate your words and advice for things that we can do for our mental capacity.
Absolutely, my pleasure. It was wonderful to spend this time with you. And yes, I do look forward to continuing this conversation. We're all in this together.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, have a great rest of the day and stay safe. Thank you.